Yeah, so I work for the National Park Service at a place called Harpers Ferry Center. It's sort of the media center for the National Park Service. Do a lot of things there, exhibits, waysides, even videos for the visitor centers across the U.S. I work in the publications office, and we primarily create the brochures that you get when you go to a national park, which pretty much all have maps on them. And there are 431 national park units. So everybody knows the national parks, but there's also national monuments, national historic sites, and we kind of treat them equally. Having said that, this will be about a national park, about creating a 3D map of the Haleakalā Volcano and Haleakalā National Park on Maui. Yeah, so the island of Maui is in Hawaii, northwest of the big island of Hawaii, 2,400 miles from the nearest continent. They are shield volcanoes. Haleakalā National Park is on the east there. Maui has been in the news lately because of the devastating fires, which took out Lahaina, which is on the west side of the island. And the park extends from the summit of Haleakalā at 10,000 feet, at the highest point on the rim there, to sea level in Kipahulu Visitor Center. So there are three visitor centers. Two of them are in the summit area. And the summit area is not really connected. It's connected continuously to the Kipahulu area on the coast, but not by trails or roads within the park. So there's sort of two different areas. To get there, you have to drive several hours. To get between the two, you'll have to drive several hours on roads outside the park. But for this map, I'm focusing on the summit area. And yeah, those are the two areas. The area there in the middle is where this map will cover. So the summit is an alpine desert. It's really surreal up there. There's cinder cones, and we call it a crater, but it's not actually a crater. The volcano at one time was much taller, and so it's been eroded. So it's more of a valley, but we still kind of refer to it as a crater. It's the easiest way. And yeah, these are just some different images from the summit. It's pretty common to go up there for sunrise. There's some unique plants and animals up there. And I'm going to go back here because it's easier to see. Off in the distance there, so this is taken from the rim, off in the distance there, you can actually see Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea on the big island of Hawaii, so an entirely different island. And yeah. So this is the current map they have. If you go there, you'll get this handout. It works perfectly well. It's monochrome, black and white map of this summit area showing the trails. You also get the brochure when you go there. So they're actually giving out 2 pieces of paper since we're doing a new brochure. The brochure currently doesn't have a summit map. So since we're doing a new brochure, the idea is to put this map into the brochure so they only have to give out one thing to save paper. I do really like these maps. I don't think I've ever made a black and white monochrome map, so maybe someday I will get that challenge. And this one also uses manual shaded relief, which is actually from a much older map in our archive for Haleakalā. And I have nothing against this map, but we're going to try to replace it. And we can use color. So the software used in this is Natural Scene Designer primarily, or creating the 3D view. That goes to Photoshop. And and then also I end up using some Eynard relief. And 5 years ago at NACIS in Tacoma here in the same building, I presented about a 3D map of Hawaii volcanoes, the Kilauea caldera specifically. And this workflow is not entirely different, but I'm going to just focus on some different aspects of it because there's no way to cover it all within a short presentation. So these are some settings in Natural Scene Designer. If you've never used it and you're interested in using Natural Scene Designer, or interested in making 3D maps, and you're intimidated, don't be. You can figure it out, especially if you're GIS people and have used GIS softwares. Or just go do a couple Blender tutorials and then come back and you'll be grateful to be a Natural Scene Designer. So here this is where setting up the camera. It's sort of like think of it as like a real-world camera taking a view from the sky. The direction is 0, which is the angle, which is north. You don't always have a north-up map when you're making a 3D map, but it worked for this, and I think north-up is ideal. You can change the pitch. You could bank the camera. I don't think I've ever done that. And one trick we use is the lens is 140 millimeters, so that's like a focal length of a camera. That's really telephoto. And then you can see the altitude at, I don't know what it is, 54,000 meters. So we're putting the camera really far away and doing a telephoto lens, and it just kind of compresses the landscape and works really well. If you use like a 35 millimeter and make the camera closer, it makes it almost wide angle and things kind of get distorted. I know 35 millimeter is not wide angle in the camera world, but that's just what it does. And then you can set the lighting angle as well. I'll show you some examples coming up, but we have the light here coming from the southeast. And the ambience is turned up to 100% here. This is something I kind of go back and forth, changing usually between 30 and 100. Natural Scene Designer will create its own shadows, and they're great if you want that. But if you want to just render out imagery or Eynard shading, you don't want Natural Scene Designer creating shadows on top of that, because you want to play with that in Photoshop and kind of add the shadows in your own way. So if you want Natural Scene Designer to not produce shadows, just turn the ambience up to 100, and they will go away. So this is, when I started out making a 3D view, I kind of came up with this. This is our unigrid. It's sort of the underlying grid of the brochures that we use. And when you're creating a 3D map, you kind of want to get the viewpoint settled at the beginning. You don't want to have to change it. You want to know the size. So I put this in there and sent it to the designer. So the core team at Harpers Ferry Center is made up of 3 people. The cartographer, me, there's a designer doing the layout and images and all that, and there's a writer-editor. And then we also have print production staff that helps us get it all printed, image acquisition specialist, and we also work with the park staff and any park partners and tribes. So there's a lot of people involved. But so I shared this with the designer, and I'm like, will this work for the layout? These are very early times. This would be helpful. And she was like, well, what if you just extended it down all the way to the ocean as the background? And at first I was like, I don't think that's going to work. This is 10,000 feet. I think the ocean's probably going to be off of the page, but I'll try. And I did, and I was very wrong. Just changed some settings in Natural Scene Designer, and so that flat area at the bottom is the Pacific Ocean. So this kind of became my viewpoint and the background for the brochure. Mostly, you'll see later, mostly everything below the summit area is kind of faded out in the background, and there's other elements put on top of it. So yeah, then get some data. I was able to get this NAPE imagery. It's high resolution, covers my whole area. NAPE can sometimes be problematic, especially in mountain areas with its shadows. The sun in the northern hemisphere is coming from the south. My light angle is from the south too, but there's very few shadows in here. And I don't know if it's a product of the latitude it's at. It's a lower latitude, yeah, the sun is taken at noon, but it worked really well. Not to say I didn't do any Photoshop to this, color adjustments. That did happen, but I didn't have to spend hours removing shadows, which I have to do sometimes. And these are just examples of some of the issues that can happen with imagery. On the left, you can see some shadows. They're light angles from the south, so not a problem. These were also in the background, so I don't think I adjusted them. And on the right, you can see a few clouds. There's a couple clouds there, but they were off to the side. I don't even think I removed them. Just some things I do when I'm first setting up. So I got the imagery laid over here. These still very early stages. I haven't done anything with it. You can see some of the shapefiles on top, the park boundary and the trails. And I'm just like, which camera angle is best? And I didn't actually make this for the presentation. I made this 6 months ago when I was making this map and for myself. And I think I may have shared with some colleagues. And then for the presentation, I'm like, well, what angle did I pick? And I look in Natural Scene Designer, and I'm actually at 39 point something degrees. So I don't know. I think it got changed again when I was extending it to the ocean. And then light angle, you can kind of pick whatever light angle you want. On a planimetric map, you probably want your light angle to come from the northwest, but on a 3D map, you're not as constrained. So did a couple examples just to kind of look at and see what I like. You can also do multi-directional lighting in Natural Scene Designer, and then Eynard has that built in as well. So, and then other data you can use on your 3D map and kind of bring these into Photoshop and use them as masks or layer them however you need. On the left is texture shading. That one's not draped over the 3D model yet, but I don't know if I did it. I don't think I did it in this project, but it's definitely a data layer I've used. And the middle one is a height mask, so kind of like a DEM draped over your 3D model. And the right one is a distance mask, so from the camera, how far away the land is from the camera. Yeah, so then pretty much every project I do these days, I bring it into Eynard and just see what it looks like. So this is an Eynard relief. So I already had my sort of regular analytical shaded relief that I had been using with the imagery, and I wanted to see what the Eynard relief looks like. And I think it looks kind of good, especially when you're focusing on the summit area. In the upper left there, it gets kind of smudgy, but that's in the background. The southern area has a lot going on, but in both reliefs it has a lot going on because it's just a very rutted mountainside. And so then I took that relief and draped it over the 3D model and rendered it out just to see what it would look like. And it's pretty cool. And just zoom in on the summit area, you can really see those cones in there and the rim. And this, you can also see how it's not actually a crater. There's sort of two valleys coming out of it. Yeah. So what I did is I didn't actually just use the Eynard relief. I kind of blended it with, I wasn't sure how well this would work, but it worked okay. I blended it with the other relief that I had. So the one on the left is before the Eynard. The one on the right is with the Eynard blended, and I only blended it in the summit area. I just didn't need to make the other areas more bold or come out. And then there's also a park boundary mask on here, so you're seeing that. And then I just looked back at the mask I used to blend the Eynard, and it kind of made me laugh because I did this a long time ago. I think what's happening is I'm experimenting with things, just quickly doing things to see how well it would work. And I liked the way it worked, so I kind of kept it. But then I look at my mask, and it's, your mask doesn't have to be that complicated. You can just make one with the brush really quick. So yeah, we're jumping ahead. Skipping over a lot of other Photoshop things that I've talked about in previous presentations, but then adding the vector data. One goal of this this project was to try to show the elevation difference from the rim to the valley floor. It is about a 3,000-foot drop, and the valley floor is a wilderness area. There's no roads or services down there, and there's no way out other than climbing back up. And you start at the visitor center that's at 9,700 feet. So you have to be prepared and understand what you're getting yourself into when you start hiking down from that visitor center. And I'm not sure if this really shows that very well. I'm not sure if anything would really show that super well. Because you're seeing 10,000 feet of elevation difference here, and it makes this summit crater look kind of small. I'll just zoom in on that so you can see it a little better. And there's a trail network there. There's some backcountry camps that you can stay at with reservations. And you can't read the caution label, but that caution label is just talking about how hiking down is optional. Hiking back up is mandatory, so be prepared. And this map, I meant to mention this at the beginning, it's still a work in progress. It actually hasn't gone through review yet. When you're deciding on a NACIS presentation in the spring, this is what I was working on at the time, and I'm like, oh yeah, this will be a cool map to talk about. But it just went out for review, so this could change a lot. And some initial feedback I've got is that it's not showing the elevation, differences as well. So maybe try some hypsometric tints. Get there in a second. So this is the layout that was sort of put together just so you can see it in context. Apologies for blurring everything out, but didn't want to show the text that hasn't been reviewed or approved or anything, and the images, I don't know what rights we have for them, so I'm just showing the maps. And you can see the Kipahulu map as well. That is just an image taken from a helicopter. That is not my map. That map actually already existed for a giant sign at that site. And I was like, it just worked so well, I had to just repurpose it and just adjust the vectors to get it to fit in this map. It is very bright and sort of distracting. I've toned it down a little bit already, but maybe it needs a little bit more toned down. I think going through and making this presentation, I've realized there's a lot of things I kind of want to change, and I probably will. So then, but the hypsometric tent thing, on the flight over here, I was just kind of playing with it, and so I made this standard gradient hypsometric tent just to see what it looked like, and I used all Eynard relief on it, and it looks kind of cool. I mean, it has potential. I think I'll adjust the colors and where they're at, too, since I'm only focusing on the summit area, but possibly this map could look way different by the time it prints. Yeah, and that's all, yeah. Thank you. Just want to shout out our website real quick, nps.gov/Carto. We do host all our maps. There's about 1,000 maps there. And we put PDFs and production files, which include the Illustrator files and Photoshop files. So if you want to see some layers and play around with it, you can download those as zip files. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Suggested you add the road to Hana at the bottom there. Is that where you put it?
The road to Hana is actually on the other side. There is a road at the bottom, but so I can go all the way up to. So the road to Hana is the one where it says narrow winding road on the north. There is a road on the south that would show up on my map, but then because of that being in the background and covered up by these other elements, I didn't put it on there.
Well, it just, to me, really conveys the scale of
Yeah.
in terms of the vertical scale. It's an amazing place.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Absolutely.
On that map, there is the top half the front and the bottom is the back? Or is it white on the back?
Oh, yeah, it's double-sided, so the other side will have much more interpretive info. Yeah. These are the folded brochures you get when you go to a park, yeah. And I don't think there's any maps on the front side, though. Usually we call this side 2 and the other one side 1, but any side could kind of be the front. And, yeah.
Hi. First of all, I think it's really great that you have a website that contains an archive full of maps, but I couldn't help but notice that you have that you're very limited on historical maps. Could you perhaps speak to that a little bit?
Historical maps, do you mean?
Just any kind of historical maps.
Yeah, we do some. I mean, it depends if it comes up in the context of the project, I guess. I've definitely done some historical maps. One I can think of recently of like Tule Lake, which was like a Japanese internment camp during World War II. So that, area doesn't really exist anymore, but I used some references to create a historical map of that. Santa Fe Trail is another one that shows, so yeah, if it comes up in the context of the interpretation we're trying to do or the story we're trying to tell, we definitely create historic maps, yeah. But there's not a ton of them on there, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like you have a lot of the experience of the place that you're mapping here. So how do you kind of wrestle between the Harper's Ferry design system and trying to work in your own kind of like subjective, just creative impulse for these sorts of maps?
Yeah, it's a good question. They give us a lot of leeway, I guess, on the design of these maps. Especially the 3D maps, they can be at lots of different designs. And they do go through extensive review processes, and I'll get a lot of feedback. And sometimes we make a map we really like, and we kind of have to trash it and start over, maybe a different angle, different extent or something, but yeah. I don't know if that answers your question fully, but.
Okay, we have time for one more. Feel free to ask Jim after as well. But if we're good,
Absolutely.
thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you.